Do you struggle to put away the overhead? It's often called one of the easiest shots in tennis, but for many players it can feel like one of the hardest. The good news is that a solid overhead isn't about strength. It's all about your technique. In this deep dive, I'm breaking down the key fundamentals to help you time it better, position yourself more correctly, and put away your overheads with confidence.
Okay, so let's just go into the basics of the overhead. The first thing is, of course, the grip. Now, ideally, you want to be on that continental grip where the index knuckle and heel pad are resting on bevel 2. So it's the same as the serve. And that's something you're going to see. You're going to see a commonality throughout this whole session, that the overhead mechanics are very similar to the serve mechanics. So if you've been working on the serve and you've been working on developing good arm mechanics, then the great news is it's a very simple and easy transition from the serve to the overhead. That's the great news. Now, what you're going to see here in the first segment of this, I'm going to go through the fundamentals of the technical fundamentals of the arm mechanics and so forth. Then the second portion, I'm going to go through the footwork mechanics that you want to look out for. And then we'll go into some common problems and fixes. So if we just look at the beginning right here, what you're going to see is Florian is in this ready position, as you can see. So at this point, he doesn't know if the overhead is coming or not. He's simply completing the split step. And Florian is waiting in his forehand volley grip. Now, some of you may have a different forehand volley grip to your backhand grip. For example, you may have your index knuckle and heel pad on bevel 2.5. Some of you may just have a continental for both the forehand and the backhand volley. But that's basically personal preference. There's no cement rule for that. But he's in this ready position. And now, as you can see, he's landing in the split step on his toes. And now he sees that the overhead is coming. The first thing you're going to see him do is he drops this foot back behind him. Watch this movement. As he lands, this foot right here is going to drop back. And this is a very, very important move. See what happens here. See how he drops that foot back to this point right here. Now, why is this so important when he drops this foot back? There's a few reasons for it. The first thing is it gets him sideways. It's very important on the overhead. A lot of players are too frontal, and there's a few problems for that. The main reason is you can't really turn and coil your body. The other reason is if you're too frontal to the net, it makes it very difficult for you to execute what we call the right to left arm action, which is extremely important for developing a lot of effortless power on your overhead. So that's the first thing. He drops that foot back and now he gets sideways. That's a key. Always think of this, getting sideways where the chest is pointing to the side fence. Now, the next component you're going to see, which is extremely crucial for a great overhead, pay attention to how he keeps the non-hitting hand on the throat of the racket as he begins to prepare. So now he raises his elbows and see how the non-hitting hand is still on the throat of the racket, and he gets into this position right here. This is key. Now, just let me know in the chat. Some of you may have heard the most common tip that we always hear, and that is pointing to the ball, pointing with a non-dominant arm. Just let me know in the chat if that's something you hear frequently. Give me a quick yes. It's a very, very common thing that's taught. Yes. Pointing, yeah. Yeah, it's a very, very commonly taught thing in the industry. But you've got to be very, very careful of this, since if you basically go from your starting position and directly point to the ball with your non-hitting hand, what will happen is you separate the arms too quickly. And usually what happens, players get into that, they get stuck in this trophy pose. So now they break what we call that fluid arm action. And it makes it very difficult for them to get into that power loop, that racket drop, and they lack power on the serve. And also they lack consistency, since it results in more tension in the arm. So what you'll see with all the best players is they get to this position first, where the racket and hand are on the right side of their body. The non-hitting hand is on the throat of the racket. Now, from this position, it allows Florian to execute that right to left going over his head, or what would be the left to right for left-handed players. But this is critical right here. If you can just get into this position where the racket and hand are on the right side of your body for a right-handed player, and the non-dominant hand is on the throat of the racket, a lot of good things are going to happen for your overhead. Now, from here, what you're going to see is he begins to anchor that back leg. So the weight is now shifted onto the back leg. On this overhead, by the way, just letting you know, he's not really put in a pressure situation. This is quite an easy overhead for him to hit.
Right now, we have a special trial of our OTI Digital Coach available for you. It not only gives you access to all our video courses and modules, but you will also receive your own personalized video analysis from one of our OTI certified instructors. Simply send us a video of the stroke of your choice during your trial, and you will receive a voiceover video analysis with laser-focused feedback on how you can transform that stroke into a real weapon. Simply click the link inside or below this video for all the details.
So the weight shifts onto the back leg. As this begins to happen, now he begins to separate the arms, as you can see. See how the non-hidden arm is separating. And now what you're going to see is, the main thing I want you to look at is how the racket begins to move right to left over his head. So as you can see, it replicates that service action it's very similar to the service action. Right to left. Now, the other thing you're going to see is as he separates the arm, the non-hidden arm, the tossing arm, is going to rise up into this position, as you can see here. And this just helps him coil the shoulders against the level of the hips. Very important. But now from here, the racket will drop down into the racket drop. He'll swing up to contact and complete the swing just like so. As you can see on this overhead, for example, where he's not really put under pressure, the weight as he begins to swing is pretty approximately even on both legs. And as he completes the swing, the weight transfers onto the front leg. And then he's up on that back toe, just like so. So those are the basics. Now let me just show you from the back angle also, so you see this more clearly. So he gets into that split step. Now, as you can see, he sees the ball is going up, and see this foot right here. You can already see what's happening with the foot. He's now dropping back with that foot. And now this allows him to get sideways with the body, as you can see here. And he gets into this position that I want you to really cement, get this visual idea in your mind, cement it in your mind, where he's now sideways. The chest is pointing to what would be the right side fence right here. And see this position with the arms. So he's holding the throat of the racket, as you can see, with his non-hidden hand. The racket and hands are on the right side of his body for a right-handed player. And now from here, it allows him to execute that right to left arm action in a fluid manner. It's very important. So see now he begins to separate. See how the racket is moving right to left over his head. And as a result, he gets into this position right here. Just like on the serve, he gets into what we call the racket drop. So the racket is aligned on the right side of the body, tip of the racket is relatively low, and he has a good relationship between the hand and the elbow. And by doing this now, he pre-stretches the front part of the shoulder muscles, he supinates the forearm muscles, and that stores what we call kinetic energy in the muscles, which is then released into the ball, and it gives him more effortless power. He completes the swing. Let's just take a look at that one more time. I'm going to play it in regular speed and pay attention to how he drops the foot back and he gets into this all crucial position right here where he keeps the non-dominant hand on the throat of the racket and he executes that right to left. Watch it in regular speed. Here we go. If you'll let me click play, that is. No, it's not letting me click play. Okay, I'm just going to play it myself. I'm going to try and do it nice and slowly for you. See how now he's preparing. The racket is moving right to left over his head. The racket drops down and away, and he extends up to contact and completes the swing. So those are the basics for the overhead. Now, there are a few other components I want to point out to you on this, since it's very important. The first thing on the overhead, you want to make sure you're swinging up and out on the overhead. You want to really swing up to that ball, since you have to counter that angle of which the ball is coming in at. Since the ball is dropping a lot faster than what it would be on the serve, and also it's dropping in at a steeper angle. So you really have to make sure you swing up to counteract that angle of which is coming in at. So what you're going to see with Florian here he really swings up to that ball. And what you're going to see is he controls his head. He keeps his head up, chin up, pointing towards where he contacts, as you can see right here. So he controls that head, and that allows him to swing up and out on the serve. What you want to keep in mind is the more you practice these fundamentals and you have that correct swing, the more you can accelerate the swing on the overhead. That's very, very important. A lot of players get tentative and they end up decelerating, and this can cause a lot of problems. But you really just want to swing. You want to go after that ball when you have those fundamentals in place. So those are the basics for just the arm mechanics. I will highlight them one more time later on in the video. But now I just want to go next onto the footwork. Now, what you're going to see here in the first scenario, we're going to see that Florian, once again, he's not really put under much pressure. So then he can use what we call shuffle steps to get into position. So as you can see, he drops that foot back. That's very important for the footwork on the overhead. If you just learn that, to drop the foot back and get yourself sideways, it's very important. But now what you're going to see is he uses what we call shuffle steps to get into position. Watch right now, a little bit of a crossover step there, but as you can see, he's not really put under pressure. Now he anchors that back leg. And pay attention now from this point. The weight is approximately even on both legs. And as he swings up to contact and through, the weight transfers onto the front leg. So that's the basic footwork for an overhead that doesn't really put you under much pressure. However, let's talk about the overhead now that really goes a lot deeper. And this requires you now to use a different footwork pattern in order to cover a lot more distance quickly. Now, these footwork patterns, let me just test some of you guys in the chat. What do you think they're called? We do use the term a lot. What footwork pattern do you have to use to cover distance? See if any of you have an idea. Bill, yep, first one to it, crossover, excellent. That's the most important thing when you're trying to cover distance for the overhead. So what you're going to see is same thing again. He drops that back leg. We call it the drop step. So now he's dropped it. Now his body, as you can see, is starting to turn more sideways. But pay attention to this foot right now. Wait a minute, this is the wrong clip. Let me just move it on. That's what he's... I want to see one more. This is the one. So pay attention to this foot. See how it's crossing over? And on this one, for example, he's pushed quite far back. So now he has to do another crossover step. This is extremely important since these crossover steps, they allow you to cover a lot more distance very quickly. The most common problem we see is people backpedal. And I'm actually going to show you some footage of that towards the end of this call. But you really want to make sure that, number one, you drop that foot back so you can get sideways. And then you want to execute these crossover steps in order to cover more distance very quickly. So he uses two crossover steps, and now he sees he's in position. So he anchors that back leg. But what you're going to see on more of this defensive overhead here, where he's pushed a little bit back, he's going to jump off of this outside leg, this back leg. And what you're going to see that right now. See how now he begins to swing up and see how he's jumping off that back leg. He hits, and now see how he has the opposite effect. He now lands on the other leg. See that one more time. So from this position here, he drops the foot back. He gets sideways. Now he crosses over once, crosses over again. As you can see throughout this whole thing, the non-dominant hand is still on the throat of the racket, still on the throat, still on the throat. Now he begins to separate and anchors that back leg. And now see how he jumps off this back leg to hit that overhead. And he lands on the opposite leg, just like so. Very, very important. Now, the other key part to this now is, especially when you push back and you're hitting more of a defensive overhead, you want to make sure you're controlling your upper body. A lot of players make the mistake of trying to generate the power from throwing their body around, and that often results in them hitting down and missing the overhead into the net. What you're going to see with Florian is he does a good job of controlling his body throughout the swing. So you can see his upper body remains pretty much still. The torsion arm is tucked into the body, as you can see right there. The head has remained still. And by doing that, it allows him to maintain that up and out swing. If he was to open up too much, the swing would end up pulling down and you'd miss the ball into the net. Now, contrary to this, what do you think is the result of the ball going long on the overhead? Some of you may have this problem where you miss the ball long a lot of the time. What do you think the reason is for it? Let me know in the chat. See some ideas. What causes the ball to go long? Not hitting it out in front. Wow, Bill, you're on the ball. Maybe you've been watching the videos, Bill. I know we got a module on that. But yep, that's exactly it. What happens is, Richard, poor follow through. The main reason for hitting the ball long is you let the ball travel too far back behind you. And this is when problems start to arise. If the ball is traveling too far back behind you and you're contacting the ball behind you, naturally, the racket face is going to be more open. And that is what's going to cause the ball to fly long. That's why it's so important that you really swing up to that ball, meet that ball. Don't let it fall too much, since that's when problems are going to start to arise. Now, you will be stuck sometimes in positions where the ball has traveled a little bit over your head. And in those scenarios, you can hit more topspin on the serve. So you can actually add more spin. So then you're adding more safety. But that's really for another call, another session. In these sessions, we're covering the basic fundamentals for a basic overhead that you're going to hit. So let's just watch that one more time. I want to show you those footwork patterns once again. Let me just go back to the first ones, the shuffle steps. So as you can see, if you're not really put too much under pressure and you don't need to move much back behind the service line, then there's no real need to use the crossover steps. All you have to do is execute the shuffle steps. So you just shuffle your feet into position. This is probably one of the most common problems we see also is players are too flat-footed. They're not really positioning themselves correctly. You want to make sure your feet are very active in the preparation. And then as you set and anchor that back leg, that's when they become more quiet, since you want to have that strong foundation then. So as you can see, he uses those shuffle steps to get himself into position. Always pay attention also how the non-hitting hand remains on the throat of the racket. Racket and hand are on the right side of his body in the preparation phase. Now he separates. And now the weight, as he begins to swing up to contact, is more even, approximately. And as he finishes the swing, the weight transfers onto the front leg. And that's the footwork for a basic overhead. Now let's see, let me just forward it on. So once again, split step, uses that drop step, foot drops behind him, turns his body sideways, extremely important. Now the foot crosses over. Once again, he crosses over. So see how much distance he's able to cover just by doing that. Now he anchors that back leg. As you can see, he separated the arms. The racket is now moving right to left over his head in a fluid manner. This is extremely important, having that fluid arm action. And now he jumps off that outside leg to hit the overhead. And he lands on the opposite leg, just like so. Those are the basic footwork fundamentals. Now, let me just show you one more time the arm mechanics from the back. And then I'm going to go into some common problems we see on the overhead. So right here. Let me just know real quick in the chat. I noticed there appears to be less pronation compared to serve. Is that correct? Yeah, there'll be also, what you'll find is you still want to swing up with the edge of the racket there, Joe. You still want to swing with the edge, but as you can see, naturally the racket face opens just a little bit earlier. And as a result, there will be less internal shoulder rotation, but you don't want to have pretty much nil. You still want to get some internal shoulder rotation there and supination of the forearm. But the key is to get that going. All you have to focus on is getting that racket moving right to left and getting into that racket drop. And if you just get that, it's going to really set things off, a chain reaction for other things to really fall into place. So that's what I'd recommend. But it's good that you noticed that. It's a good point. So let's just see here. He split steps. Now he drops the foot behind him and he gets sideways. Really focus on getting sideways. It's very important for the overhead. He has that non-hitting hand on the throat, racket and hander on the right side of the body. If you as a left-handed player, it'll be on the left side of the body, but you want to keep it out to the right side, just like so. Now he separates and the racket moves right to left over his head. Moves in this fashion, just like so. Follows that basic swing path. As you can see, by doing this, by getting the right to left, he increases what we call that acceleration path to contact. A lot of players have a very short acceleration path. It looks something more like this, just like so. But as you can see with Florian's, he has a long acceleration path to contact, and that's because he executes that right to left and he gets into that racket drop. Very important. Completes the swing. So yeah, that's the basics for basic fundamentals. Let me just see, Jack, what is the maximum number of crossover steps that might be necessary for a high lob and an indoor facility like the one on this video? Well, anywhere ranging between 2 or 3 crossovers. What you'll find, Jack, is I'd recommend, well, there's no real set in stone recommendation. It all depends on the situation. But what you'll find most likely is they'll use at least 1 or 2 crossover steps to cover more distance very quickly. And then after using those crossover steps, they start to then use those stutter steps to reposition themselves. The crossover steps are really used for covering distance a lot quicker, since the ball is going up over them. So yeah, it could range anywhere between 2 or 3 crossovers, but then you'll use stutter steps to really get yourself into that optimal position. Richard, if the ball goes high to the backhand, do you move left or you do hit a backhand overhead? Well, I knew I should have exported the footage, Richard, of the backhand overhead. You could definitely hit a backhand overhead. It depends on the situation. Let me just stop sharing my screen for a second so I can talk to you guys. And then I'll actually go back and share my screen again. How do I get back to Zoom? Zoom, stop share. Okay. Can you guys see me now? I'm not sure if you can see my screen. I'll just spotlight my thing. There you go. Broadcasting, okay. Yeah, we'll go back to the iPad in a second, but let me just see some of these questions here. Yeah, Richard, if the ball goes too high to the backhand, do you move left or do you hit a backhand overhead? Well, Richard, if you have the time and you feel like you have the time to move over to hit that regular overhead, by all means do it. But you will be in scenarios on the tennis court where you do have to hit that backhand overhead. Now, I could explain the fundamentals for a backhand overhead. Do I have the camera set up though? I don't. I was thinking about this, Richard, in the call. I was like, should I get the footage for the backhand overhead? Will we get a question about it? And I thought, yeah, we probably won't get a question. But yeah, that's the basis, Richard. What I will actually do, I just remembered this actually. For all the people that's in the call right now, we will be most likely sending you an email to, number one, the link of this the recording session. But then also underneath that video where you'll find this recording, I'm going to post a link there that will redirect you to the module that Florian did on the overhead. And in that module, Richard, he actually has a full video on the backhand overhead. And he has slow motions and he has the explanations on how to hit it. So that's what I'll do. That just makes it a lot easier. Since trying to explain it here, I'd have to set up the other camera real quick. And it'll just be a nightmare. You'll have to wait for me to do it. So I hope that's a better way of doing it. Daniel, how do you hit a drop shot smash? Well, Daniel, that'll be difficult. That's for sure. Hitting a drop shot off the smash. What we'd usually recommend, Daniel, is when you're in those situations, it's better for you. We have a saying that basically goes power over trying to outplace the opponent, especially on the overhead. Since some of the most common problems we see is when players are in a match situation and the ball is sent up over their head, what they try and do is they try and place the ball too close to the lines. So they're really trying to go for more of that placement, trying to move the opponent off. And what ends up happening is they miss the ball. They either miss wide or they miss into the net, since they're trying to go for too much pinpoint accuracy towards the lines. However, what you'll see with the best players in the world is they go aggressive to big targets, since they know that even if the opponent gets there, it's most likely going to be another ball that sits up, and then they have another opportunity to put the ball away. And the closer you get to the net, that's when you can start to angle the ball off the court. But what we always say is, if you can hit a more of a powerful overhead that goes relatively deep, centered down the court, then you're going to put the opponent under a lot of pressure anyway in that scenario. So on the overhead in the beginning, try to go for more power, getting those fundamentals in place first, go into big targets. Really go for 2 or 3 feet inside the single sidelines. Really go for big targets and go for some power there, since you're going to put the opponent under pressure and they're not going to be able to do much with that other ball. If they do pass you, then that's just a good shot by them. But that's the general guideline for what we recommend there. Caroline, do you have a video side-by-side comparing the serve with the overhead? Actually, I may be able to do this. Let me see if I can... give me 1 second, guys. Let me see if I can set up a comparison. In the meantime, guys, let me know in the chat if this is all making sense to you, whilst I try and find... see if I can find footage of my serve to compare it with. That's a good suggestion, by the way, comparing it to a regular serve. You can actually see how similar it is. It's just the overhead is more abbreviated. That's the only difference. Just have to bear with me. I have to scroll through hundreds of reviews just to find my serve. Since I review a lot of strokes every day. Holy moly, there's a lot of videos on here. Again, close. There we are. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again with you guys so you can see this. Let's go to Zoom, share content. Let me remove my spotlight. So now you can see the screen. Start. Coach's eye. Okay. Let me know when you can see the screen. Give me a yes in the chat when you can see it. Yes. Okay, good. Let me just bring this back here. Bring this back. Thumbs up, yes. Okay, awesome. So what you're going to see is the main difference you're going to see is it's a lot more abbreviated on the overhead, and that's simply due to you don't have as much time, since the ball is dropping quite fast towards you, and you simply don't have the time to go through the regular service motion. So what you're going to see, as you can see with Florian right here, so he abbreviates the swing and he gets at this position, pretty similar to what we call the half serve position. The racket and hand are on the right side of the body. But now on the right side, you can see my serve right here. As you can see, I go through this motion. I delay my hitting arm. That's just a personal preference. But this is what I want to show you. I want to show you the similarities now from relatively this point. I'm going to draw in this racket path. I'm going to draw in on both sides. And you're going to see how they pretty much follow the same path. So watch my one first. See how the racket moves right to left over the head. Racket moves into that racket drop. As you can see, the racket's aligned on the right side of the body. Hand in relationship to the elbow. Tip of the racket is relatively low. Continues to move out to the right side. Leads with the edge of the racket, as you can see. Now I get more internal shoulder rotation on the serve. I do have more flexibility in the shoulder, of course. Just like so. But pay attention to that right to left on that racket drop. This is the main component you want to look out for. Right to left, and then racket drop. Now take a look at Florian's on the left side. Right to left, See that movement right there, right to left, racket drop. So you can see it's basically a carbon copy. It's just more abbreviated into that racket drop, just like so. Now, as mentioned to Joe, as you can see, the racket face does open just a little bit earlier. As you can see on the right side here, my racket is still pretty much on edge. Whereas you can see the racket face is just a little bit more open there. But those are just subtle differences. But you can see the swing is very, very similar on both strokes. Let me know if that clears it up for you, if that makes sense, and if that's a good comparison for you to see. If it is, then we'll go into the other component where I can show you the common problems that we see. Let's go back here. Now, common problems. Okay. Yes, that was useful. Okay, awesome. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to look at 3 common problems that we see on the overhead. The first one is being too frontal. And this is a very, very common thing you see. They're too frontal, and players, as a result, they end up backpedaling. And this is very, very detrimental for your overhead for many reasons. And I'll go into the reasons for this now. But on the right-hand side, you're going to see the incorrect footage right here. On the left-hand side, you're going to see the correct. Now, let's just pay attention to the incorrect one right here, since you've seen the correct one a few times now. But see what Florian does here. See how he doesn't really turn away from the target. See how his chest is pointing towards the net. And as a result now, he's backpedaling, as you can see. Now, there's a few problems with this. The first problem is when you backpedal, you can't really cover much distance. It takes a lot longer to cover the same distance of what you would cover with the crossover steps than if you use these backpedaling steps just like so. Now, the other problem with backpedaling, we've actually had players who actually have had injuries from this, since they backpedal and they actually fall back. And I've known of a player that fell back. This is a story from Greg, I believe. He fell back and broke his wrist since he was backpedaling. So this is something you do really want to avoid. And also the other big problem with this when you backpedal is it messes up the arm mechanics. You can't really get that right to left, and you can't get into an optimized racket drop. You can already see the difference there. See the racket drop on the right side in comparison to the left side. You can see the big difference. So you really want to focus, if we take a look now at the left side of the screen, you want to focus on dropping that foot back and getting sideways. That's why it's so critical, getting sideways, since now you can coil the body sufficiently. You can execute that right to left arm action. And also you can get that nice up and out swing path. Also, that sideways position allows you to execute that crossover footwork pattern. It's very important. So that's the first common problem we see. Let me know in the chat if you feel that some of you do this, if you backpedal. Give me a yes or no. If you do, don't be ashamed by it. It's very common. Backpedaling. Jennifer, oh yes. Yeah. Well, Jennifer, if you just learn that one thing, just learning to drop that foot back and get in sideways, that's really going to help you a lot. Hugh, sometimes when I'm lazy. Tim, I do. Stephanie, yes, I don't turn side on. Okay. No, after lots of practice, nice. Okay, so that's a good sign then. That's a good fundamental you're already beginning to learn now then, is dropping that foot back and getting sideways. It's very, very important. Now, let's go on to the next common problem that you're going to see. And it's a very common problem on the overhead. And that is players hit down too much. So if we just forward it on. Okay, on the right-hand side, once again, you're going to see the incorrect. On the left, you're going to see the correct. But let's pay attention to the incorrect version first. So he prepares, as you can see here. And what I want you to pay attention to is what happens to his head and his upper body as he swings through contact. See what's already happening right here? Boom. Now, as you can see at contact, you see the two scenarios. On the left-hand side, you can see he's still relatively upright with his upper body. That tells you he's swinging up and out. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see his upper body is already beginning to collapse. And as you can see, he's pulling that ball down. See the difference right there? His head is coming down and his body is coming down. And what happens is, as soon as your head begins to shift and pull down, the swing is going to follow. Wherever your head goes, the swing follows. It's very important that you keep your head up and your chin up, and you keep it in that position as you swing through contact. See that there, right there? See how he pulls down, and that results in the ball going into the net. Now, why does the ball go into the net? What happens is we have a tendency, this applies also on the serve, we end up looking down at our target through the net, and that causes us to swing down on the serve. And especially on the overhead, people really do think that they have to hit down in order to keep that ball in. But you basically let gravity do its work. If you just swing up and out and you get that up and out swing path, gravity will do its work, and you'll find that you're going to get a lot more overheads in, and you're going to get them in consistently with a lot of power. So the next time you go out onto that tennis court, really focus on swinging up to the ball, swing up and out with good acceleration, and keep your head still as you do this. As soon as you start to shift the head too much and you open up the body, that's when things are going to start to really break down from that stage. But with that in mind, now let's take a look at the left-hand side. You're going to see the difference right here. You're going to see how he controls his head. He controls his upper body as he swings through. See how his whole body remains very still as he swings through, his upper body and chest. Tossing arm remains tucked in. Head remains still. He controls that upper body. It's very important. So that's the second common problem we see. Players swing down too much. I know I had this problem myself when I was playing. I would always swing down. I'd always miss the ball into the net. But as soon as I really learned to, number one, turn more sideways, the more sideways you are, the easier it is to get that up and out swing. And once I started focusing on that up and out swing path, that really transformed my overhead. Since then, I could trust it and I could really accelerate and go after that ball. Now, let's go on to the third common problem that we see, and that is separating the arms too early. Now, we did discuss this earlier in the call where we said about players pointing to the ball. You're told to point to the ball, and you're going to see this in this footage right here. On the right side, you're going to see how quickly he separates the arms. And now he's beginning to point to the ball very quickly. See this right here. See the difference between the right and the left side? Now, what's the main thing you can see right here? See how already when he gets into this position where he's pointing to the ball, see how the racket has now stopped. He's broken that momentum and that racket head speed. So now he has to recruit muscle in order to re-accelerate the racket. Now, with that being said, are there good players that are able to execute this, that point to the ball? Yes, of course, there are good players. But you're basically trying to run uphill. You're making it very difficult for yourself if you try and execute this, as opposed to doing what we're teaching you on the left-hand side. On the left-hand side, you're going to see that he keeps his left hand on the throat of the racket. He gets into this position where the racket and the hands are on the right side of the body. And now as he begins to separate, now the racket moves right to left in a fluid manner over his head. And it allows him to get into a better racket drop, and it generates more racket head speed as a result. Let me just see. The wrong one also happens when the ball is less deep than expecting. Do you do this? Els, do you do this? Do you point to the ball? By the way, that sounds, it feels like you may have that problem. Let me know in the chat. But yeah, this is a very common one. That's the other reason, the other problem with this is when you point to the ball, it really hinders your ability to get that shoulder turn. It results in you being more frontal to the net. Instead, if you execute what we're showing you on the left-hand side, it's going to allow you to make use of that coiling of the upper body. And now as the arms separate, see how his non-hitting arm, it does rise. It rises, as you can see. It follows that green line. But that's more due to him coiling the body. Now what he's done is he's created a separation angle between his shoulders and his hips. And by doing that, we call it disassociation. It stores kinetic energy in the muscles, and that helps with generating more racket head speed and more power. So that's basically going to cover all of the basic fundamentals for the overhead. And I hope that in this session, you was able to see that it's very, very similar to the service mechanics. The real key is, number one, getting sideways, and number two, if you can just get into this position where the racket and hands are on the right side of the body for a right-handed player, on the left side of the body for a left-handed player. And if you get into this position where you're sideways and the non-dominant hand is controlling the racket, a lot of good things are going to happen. Since then, it's going to help you execute that right to left, get into a good racket drop, and get a good swing path from that stage. We're just going to be working with basically the basic overhead and the basic footwork patterns. We're not really going to be going into much detail on the defensive overhead or the backhand overhead. We're going to save that for other live calls. So for this call, we're just going to go into the basics. And if you just master these basics alone, you'll transform your overhead into a major weapon. So the first portion of this live call, we're going to do a train along session. I'm going to take you through a series of progressions where we slowly build it up through what we call the micro progressions. It's very important. And it's going to lay out a clear, basically a practice plan of what you can use. So you can use this at home, you can use it on the court, and it'll probably take, anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes to complete. But it's a great way to really work on the fundamentals of the overhead. Now, before we get into the first progression, the first thing that we all must strive towards is the correct grip. So you want the same grip as your serve grip. So that will be the index knuckle and the heel pad placed on bevel 2. Now, if you're more extreme over to, let's say, a forehand grip, then trying to make a big grip change can be quite challenging. So all you have to do then is just work in incremental stages. So let's say you're on bevel 3 right now, then instead of moving right over to bevel 2, simply go to bevel 2.5. So that would be the ridge between bevel 2 and bevel 3. So it's more of an incremental change and it's easier to incorporate. So that's with the grip out of the way. Let's go on to progression 1. And progression 1, we're going to be working on the preparation alone, just for a basic overhead. We're not going to add any footwork into it. And it's going to look something like this. I'm going to demonstrate it first, and then we'll go into the train along from there. But what you're going to see, I'll do it from the front angle first. Now, just imagine now the net is in front of me. I'm moving towards the net in this direction, just for visual purposes. What you'll see is they'll be in the ready position, all the best players, and they'll split step. Now, as they split step and the momentum is taking them forward, and now let's say now they're anticipating the overhead is coming. What you'll see is they'll split step and they'll have this balance step. For a right-handed player, it'll be the left foot will come forward, and this now allows them to push off this left foot and turn sideways. And see how, watch what happens with my right foot. You split, balance step, and now as I turn, this right foot drops behind me. And now it allows me to get into this sideways position. And this is crucial since it allows you to execute the right footwork pattern, but also it allows you to execute the right mechanics for the overhead. It's very, very important, this. Now, the other thing you're going to see, I'll show you from the back angle now. So it looks like this. It'll drop step and then they'll turn. Now, in this preparation phase, you can see also, this is probably one of the most important concepts of the overhead. See how I'm cradling the racket in my non-dominant hand. I'm controlling the racket here, just holding the racket. It's doing all the work. Very, very important. A lot of players are told, and it's mistakenly taught to point at the ball, and they separate too early. When they do this, it automatically opens up your body too early, and it hinders your ability to execute the true right to left motion over your head. So it's very important that you get into this position where both hands and racket are on the hitting side of the body. For a right-handed player, it'd be on the right side of your body. For a left-handed player, it'd be on the left side of your body. But try and get into this position where the elbows are raised, hands are on the right side of the body. Now, the other thing you can see how the palm and the strings are pointing down. That's also very important. So just watch that one more time before we go into the train along portion for progression 1. So it looked like this. It'll be split step, balance step, turn, and hold. And double check this position. Also see how the weight's on the back leg now. I've anchored that back leg. So does all that make sense? Let me know. Give me yes in the chat if it does, because then we're going to be doing around 10 to 15 repetitions of this alone. Just getting into that turned preparation position. Yep, yes. Yes, okay, cool. So on me, make sure you go nice and slowly in the beginning. And when you're in this position, I want you all to stop and double check. and look back to the camera or the screen to make sure that you look very similar to what I look like, okay? So let's start with 1. So let's go right ahead. So you're in the ready position, split step, balance step, turn, drop this leg back and get into this loaded position. Load the back leg, have the racket and hands on the right side of the body, elbows raised, just like so. Double check it. Now let's go back into the ready position. Split, forward, turn. Feel how you're anchoring that back leg. Preparation looks good. So that's progression 1. Now what we're going to do, progression 2, we're going to add the swing to the equation right now. Now in progression 2, there's no footwork. You can use a shuffle step if you want. So just a little shuffle, just like so, to add a little bit of footwork. But right now, I'd recommend that you leave that out since we're going to be adding footwork in progression 3. Now, progression 2, what's it going to look like? We're going to combine progression 1, and in progression 2, once we've reached this stage, so at the end of progression 1, what you want to do then is, once you've anchored this back leg and you've loaded that weight, the arms will begin now to separate, and the racket will now move right to left over the head. It'll drop down into that racket drop, and then from there, you'll lead with the edge of the racket up to contact and complete the swing just like so. It's basically a carbon copy of the serve. All it is abbreviated. So you're not starting in this normal position like you would on the serve. So one more time, look at that again. So after you've completed progression 1 and you're in this position, once you've loaded that outside leg, the back leg, the arms will now begin to separate. The racket will move right to left. The racket will fall down and away from the body. You'll lead up with the edge of the racket and complete the swing. And I just want you to hold. And at the end, the weight, if I show you from the front angle, so the weight right now is on the back leg. Once I've completed the swing, the weight is on the front leg. So it looks something like this. It's going to be split step, balance step, drop, right to left, racket drop, boom, boom, hold. Okay, let's start. Let's go into that ready position. Split step, balance step, turn, hold, double check, all looks good. Now arms separate, right to left, racket drop, complete. So now let's go into some details on progression 3, what we're going to do. We're going to be working with those crossover steps, and a little quick thing on the crossover steps. The reason we've been working on getting sideways is because it's going to be a lot easier for you to execute these crossover steps. Now, why are these crossover steps so important? As we just mentioned, it allows you to cover a lot more distance very quickly. The number one mistake we see players make is they don't turn away, they're too frontal to the net, and they end up backpedaling, just like so. Now, there's major problems with this. The first is you can't get back very quickly when you're backpedaling. The second is you can have potential injuries by doing this. The crossover step will look something like this. So you'll do the split, boom, you'll turn. Now watch for a right-handed player. My left foot will cross over the right foot, just like so. And then I'll get back to there. Watch that one more time. It'll be split, balance, turn. See how I've dropped this foot back, which will allow me now to cross over, just like so. So progression 3, we're going to combine progression 1. And we're just going to get into that preparatory position, just like so. We're not going to complete the swing. All we're going to do is do the split step, do a 1 crossover step. Don't do 2, just do 1 for now. 1 crossover step back and get into the preparation position. Now, I'm going to show you a few where you do without the racket. You can do it with your hands, since it's also very effective to do this, especially if you have low ceilings. So let me just demonstrate one. So you'll be in a ready position. You'll do the split step, balance, turn. 1 crossover step, load the back leg, and now you're in this position. Just like so. See one more? It'll be split step, balance, turn, crossover, load, stop, double check. So in progression 4, we'll do exactly the same what we did in progression 3, but now we're just going to add from the end of this preparation phase, you're going to add that right to left, racket drop, and complete. So ready position, split step, balance, turn, cross over, anchor. Now, once I've anchored, the arms will separate, right to left, racket drop, and complete. And then what we're going to do is, once you've completed the swing, I want you to move back forward into that split step. So it's going to be more continuous now. So it'll be split step, balance, turn, cross over, anchor, right to left, boom, back into a split step, anchor, turn, boom, boom, right to left, boom, back into a split step, boom.
Right now, we have a special trial of our OTI Digital Coach available for you. It not only gives you access to all our video courses and modules, but you will also receive your own personalized video analysis from one of our OTI certified instructors. Simply send us a video of the stroke of your choice during your trial, and you will receive a voiceover video analysis with laser-focused feedback on how you can transform that stroke into a real weapon. Simply click the link inside or below this video for all the details.